We have a tougher mission today, gentlemen. Probably tougher than you ever had. We're going to tell your story in 35 minutes. Can you think we can do that? I think we can. As Craig was talking, there is going to be a series about the 8th Air Force starting in January, Masters of the Air. These are some of those Masters of the Air that you'll learn about in that TV show. They went with the 8th Air Force, and if you're not familiar with the 8th Air Force, they had more casualties than anyone in the military and in the Air Forces. They flew over Germany and won the war for us over there through daylight bombing. Multiple medals of honor, multiple ace pilots and gunners, and all in all, a group of inspiring heroes that help us win World War II. I'm going to introduce these gentlemen right up front because so you know who they are and a little bit about them. At the very end, we have Mr. Heidecke, who was a bombardier of the B-17 in Germany. All these gentlemen flew on B-17. Mr. Heidecke is 98 years old. Mr. Jenner, the gentleman here in the Air Force uniform, was a radio operator and aerial gunner on the B-17 with the 452nd Bomb Group. He's 100 years old. Johnny Luckadoo, sitting 2 down from me, was with the 100th Bomb Group, which will be seen a lot in this television show we're talking about. He's 101 years old, a pilot, a co-pilot who flew 25 missions over Germany. Mr. Martin, right here beside me, 100 years old, pilot for the B-17, 379th Bomb Group, flew the almighty Iron Maiden during the war. And finally, Mr. Lester Shrink, down there. He was a ball turret gunner on the B-17, captured as a POW. He will be 100 years old in November. So you get an idea of who these gentlemen are. I would like to start with you, Mr. Heidecke, down on the end. I understand on your first mission, your plane went in.
That's right.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. I got an hour, right?
No, you got about 5 minutes.
I flew 23 missions during World War II. My first mission, you get the worst spot usually in the formation. And we were flying, we call Tail and Charlie, low group, over Ham, Germany, and we got hit. Meaning 2 engines were on fire, and B-17 doesn't stay up on 2 engines. However, the pilot didn't want us to bail out because he didn't want us to become prisoners of war. So we stayed with the plane, and thank God the plane didn't go like that, but it was going like that. And we made it across the Rhine River into Belgium, and the pilots saw a pursuit, meaning a fighter field, and Ed Cantrell, that was just on recently, I went to Europe with him in March, and I went back to where we crashed in Saint-Trond, Belgium. And what a coincidence, after 79 years, he was a fighter pilot out of that airport. And when we crashed there, if I may, don't get angry, some big guy came out and said, "What are you doing here with that big-ass bird?" And that I remember, I'll never forget. And I said, "What are the German signs doing all over?" And this guy, whoever he was, Ed seemed to think he was a ground personnel, said we let him up for sentimental reasons. So we stayed in Belgium at Saint-Trond for 4 days. And then a C-47 came back from England to pick us up, and then I flew 22 more missions. But I don't know what else you want me to say.
Let's move on a minute so everybody has a chance to say something.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Jenner.
Yes, sir.
You were a radio operator and aerial gunner flew some 25 missions, but I think the one that may have stuck with you most was your last mission, when you
Well,
flew over
yeah.
D-Day. Would you like to
Yeah.
talk about that?
Would you like to know from the start or from the finish?
Let's do the finish, your last mission.
My last mission, I had already flown 30 missions in the B-17, and I was waiting for a trip home. And my pilot came into our Quonset hut, and he said that he was picked for a special mission for the next day, and he wanted a crew. He says it would be top secret, nobody would know about it, and there would be no questions asked. And so I said, well, I'll volunteer to go with him. It just so happened that out of my crew, I was the only volunteer that he got. But anyway, the next morning, we ended up with an airplane and a full crew, took off and went to the coast of France. There we saw hundreds and hundreds of boats, ships of all type, and a ton of guys in the water, all going ashore on the coast of France, Omaha Beach. And even I saw tanks floating in the water. Of course, then it was a rough day, and the water was rough, and most of the tanks all sank along with their crew. We flew RB-17 up and down the coast of France during about 3 hours of the invasion. And at that time, there was so many of our boys that was in the water. Some of them had already succumbed to the temperatures or were wounded or hit. And it was something that stayed with me for the rest of my days. We did this for about 3 hours, finally turned around and went back home. But the sights of the landing and of our boys stayed with me forever, and it's just hard to get rid of.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Luckadoo, you were with the 100th Bomb Group?
Yes, sir.
Would you talk
The
a little
original
bit?
group.
Excuse me? Would you talk a little bit about what your group was facing in 1943 when you reported for duty, I think in June of 43 or around that time, and thereafter?
Correct. Well, the original group went overseas in June of 1943. You're quite correct. I would like to clarify one thing before we go any further, and that is that the mighty 8th Air Force consisted of more than just the B-17s. The B-17s were a very important part of the 8th Air Force, but we also had B-24s, and in June of 1943, very early in World War II, I was 21 years old, about the age as many of you here in the audience. We didn't know what we were going to be confronted with. We were pushed into the war so early, totally without adequate training. Air Force in the world. They had been fighting for 4 years on the Eastern Front against the Russians. They'd been through the Battle of Britain on the Western Front recently, and they were experienced. They were battle tested. We were hairy-headed college kids, and we didn't have a clue as to what we were going to be confronted with. But we were called to duty. We took an oath that we would defend the Constitution and defend our values, both foreign and domestic. And today, we are being betrayed from within, because many of our people in uniform and in Congress fail to recognize their obligation to live up to their oath. Period.
Let me come back to you with another question I have for you. Mr. Martin, you were flying a B-17. You were a pretty young pilot, were you not?
I was 19 at the time.
Talk a little bit about taking responsibility of a bomber plane at the age of 19.
Well, it never occurred to me that my age had anything to do with taking responsibility for a plane. I had, from childhood, dreamed of becoming a pilot, commercial pilot, after the war, and this was just one of the steps along the lines of my career, piloting, that is. And a quick aside, I graduated in class of 43A. We got our wings and our bars. I was in a class of 141 young men. Our instructors, I think, were going to have a little fun with us, and one of them said, how many of you young men want to be fighter pilots? 140 hands went up in the air. And he looked around and said, any bomber pilots? Mine was the only hand that went up. He in fact said, what kind of bomber, what kind of airplane do you want? And I said, well, the more engines it has, the more interested I am in it. I was obviously very optimistic, a young man. I was thinking in terms of all of this would be valuable. My experience would be valuable as a commercial pilot. It never, and with all of what we've heard both here on this stage tonight, but even more so the previous meetings we've had, the question was asked about your state of mind, fear, anticipation, whatever it might be. And I can tell you that for ways and means that I really find difficult to explain, I never thought in terms of that I wouldn't finish the war. It was, when I say optimist, it was in capital letters. It was, I just didn't consider being one of those who would fail to come back from a mission.
Thank you. Mr. Schrenk,
Yes, sir.
you were a ball turret gunner.
Yes, sir.
What's that like?
Well, it's a little bit confining. It's a ball that's exactly 3 feet across, and of course, you're in there with two 50 caliber machine guns, all of your ammunition, and a great big computerized gun sight. Not only that, but I was 5'11", and the most ball-turret gunners were like 5'6", 5'7", so I was a little bit crowded.
I understand at one point your plane was shot down, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you were incarcerated.
Yes?
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Being incarcerated? It's horrible. Starting with the interrogation, you're in this great big room waiting for your interrogation. You don't know what to expect, but you realize that it's going to be torture. And there's maybe like 500 other prisoners, and all awaiting their turns. And you hear all kind of the most horrible sounds you can imagine, beating, screaming, begging for mercy, and even an occasional gunshot. And you're just waiting for your turn. And I can still remember the German guard that come to take me. The first thing you noticed, he only had a left arm. He didn't have a right arm. The other thing, he had a great big scar across his face to the point where he was missing his left eye. He took you into the interrogation room, and the German that was interrogating you acted like your best friend. The first thing he says, Mr. Schrank, I see you're one of the lucky ones. You're not too badly wounded. I said, that's right, sir. He said, would you like a cigarette? I said, no, thank you. He said, would you like to sit down? I said, I'd prefer to be standing up. Then, to my amazement, he brought out a file on me about my parents, that I was born on a dairy farm. He named my mother and father, named my brother and sister. He said, yeah, we know all about you. Then he said, I'm sure that your loved ones would like to know about that you're safe. And I said, that's right, sir. He said, we do that through the Red Cross. So they had known my mother and father, so I filled that out. Then all the rest of the questions were all military, like what kind of bombs were you carrying, what your intended target. And I left it all blank. He immediately went into a rage and slapped me across the face, and he said, don't you think we know that you were flying at a B-17? And this kept on for some time, and all I would give my name, rank, and serial number. Then at last, he took his Luger, put it right against my temple, and he said, you better answer the next question or else. And of course, I thought back to the gunshot and regained myself and gave my name, rank, and serial number. He gave me a great big boot, and I flew out of the room, and I knew interrogation was over. I found out later that if you would have given even the least little information, you would have been beaten to a pulp trying to get more information.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hadeke,
Yes.
you said some of the more memorable missions you went on were over Belgium and the Netherlands, Chowhound missions. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, okay. In late April of '45, the Germans still occupied most of the Netherlands. Not all, but most, like Amsterdam, The Hague, the Delft. And the powers to be on our side decided to put plywood floors in the Bombay. A lot of people don't know this. The people in Holland were starving to death, around 5,000 a week. None of us knew this. And the British Lancaster bombers and some B-17 groups were picked, and we loaded the planes with 111,000 tons of K-rations. There were 5 missions. I flew 3 of them, May 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, As you know or don't know, the war ended May 8th. And instead of flying at 25,000 feet, we came in at around 200 to 300 feet. And I saw cows, not steer, cows stampeding, and I always said they must have had curdled milk for about a week. But it was I told my dad when I got home, I flew all my missions at 19, I said it was a beautiful way to end the war, doing something good. And the people of Holland had written on the rooftops with flowers, "God bless you, boys." And it was really very rewarding.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Mr. Luckadoo, I've seen you make other presentations. You said that the 8th Air Force faced 4 enemies. Do you want to tell us very briefly what those 4 enemies were?
I'd be happy to. We discovered that we were facing not just one enemy, but actually 4, all of which began with the letter F. The first was fear. As I've already described to you, we were scared to death. And we admitted that because we didn't know what we were confronting. The second was the flak, the anti-aircraft fires that the Germans could throw up to protect their targets from the ground, against which we had no defense. We were flying at 25 to 29,000 feet, 5 miles above the ground, in unpressurized aircraft. The third was because we were flying at such high altitude, it was an alien atmosphere and we were freezing to death. We were enduring temperatures of minus 50 and 60 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit for hours on end. And that seriously impaired our ability to function. And the last, but not the least, of course, was the fighters. And they were formidable. I've already given you a brief description of how experienced and battle-tested they were. So we were not just fighting one, but 4 enemies.
Thank you very much. A quick question for each of you. Your plane's name was the Iron Maiden, correct?
Correct.
Your plane?
Well, I had several.
Your
The first-
favorite plane?
First was Sunny.
Mr. Jenner, what was the name of your plane?
Lady Satan.
Lady Satan. Where did that come from?
Well, my plane had the name when I joined them. The crew had already named the airplane back in the States. And when they started flying combat, they lost a waist gunner, and I volunteered to go to the 452nd. But it was the Lady Satan that the name of the airplane.
Thank you. Mr. Schrank, what was your plane's name?
The one I was shot down in was named Pot O' Gold by another crew. But being we were shot down in it, we kind of claimed it as our own airplane.
Mr. Hedeke, your plane?
Well, I don't know if you know this, you didn't fly all your missions in one plane.
Gotcha.
Because when a plane got hit, had to be fixed. But I flew probably 6 or 8 of my 23 in the plane called the Eradicator. It had the body of a rat, the head of Hitler, and it said, a bomb above it said rat poison.